So growing up in church, and whether you grew up in church or not, I'm sure you've heard the story of David and Goliath. I mean, everybody has heard that story, and it's an amazing story. I mean, who doesn't love the fact that a 16-year-old boy defeats this giant? I mean, who doesn't love that? It's literally a phrase that people use all the time. They go, it's a David and Goliath situation. Because in it, we already know who should have won. The person that won was not what everybody expected. It seemed obvious. And here's the thing about David's life. David fought a lot of giants. Now, some of those were literally physical giants. Some of those were just problems in his life. He had all kinds of things happen to him. We hear about David and you think, man, this guy, all these great things and all this. Dude, this guy had some rough stuff happen to him. And we're going to look at him just a little bit today. And here's the thing I love about David. David's life is a giant adventure. And throughout this adventure, he had one goal. He was striving to move towards God. He was continually leaning in and driving his life towards God. So today what we're going to focus on with David is this: his amazing leadership. David was an amazing leader, and I hope by the end of today that you'll begin to think, how can I be a leader like David? But let's start with some of the giants that David faced. He faced a lot of giants, just like we will as well, and he faced real ones like Goliath. He faced vicious animals as a little boy. Listen to this, 1 Samuel 17. Okay, it says this. He is saying this to Saul. He's in front of Saul at this point. It says, but David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I love that phrase. This doesn't mean he's fighting for his own life. The lion and the bear is already gone and he wants the sheep back. There is no way on this green earth I'm chasing that sheep. Like it's already gone. Just let it be gone. David says, no, that's my sheep. And he goes after him. And then it says, I struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. All right, next step now. He didn't just hit it with his sling. David grabbed the lion's head and punched it in the face. That's what we're talking about here. That is one bad dude, all right? And he's like, what, 13? He's 14? That's what David is doing. He says this, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be just like one of them. Because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. Saul said to David, go and the Lord be with you. I love how David wasn't scared. He was not scared. He's like, I punched a lion in the face. What else is there? I don't care about this giant that I have to face. He goes, God has been with me before and God will be with me again. If there's one thing that you take away from this, that's what I want you to think about. Every time you face a giant, whatever that struggle is, whatever that situation is, you can always think back and go, God was with me before, God will be with me again. You see, David knew that. That's how David was going to become a great leader. He followed God, and God always provided and took care of him. And he would that day also. Now here's the thing about David and Goliath. You've heard the story. You may not have known this part. 1 Samuel 9 says this. Kish had a son named Saul, so the King Saul, as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel. And he was a head taller than anyone else. You may not know that verse was in there. And here's what they would do in battles back then. They would send out their top dog warrior. My top dog warrior will fight your top dog warrior, and whoever wins this battle. That keeps everybody from being killed. It's just, I guess that was their civilized way of handling it. So they send out Goliath. He's about 9'6". His head's like up in a basketball goal practically. I mean, this guy is massive. And so Israel should have sent out their biggest man. Guess who that was? King Saul. King Saul is a chicken, all right? We've seen that before. They wanted to make him king, and the Bible literally says he was hiding in the baggage. He was hiding. He didn't want to become king. He's a chicken, and so he's the one that should be going out there, and the 16-year-old boy comes to him and says, I'll take care of it. And he's like, go right ahead. May the Lord be with you, because I don't want to go do it. And David could have done a couple things here. David could have looked at Saul and said, This is your job, dude. You should be the one out there. I'm a 16-year-old boy. David didn't do that. David said this. He goes, I know God will take care of me. When I step out in faith, God will take care of me. And David had already seen the faithfulness of God, and he knew that he could trust it. He knew he could trust it. David had dealt with giants, lions, and bears, and he grew through that process. You see, that's how we grow also. We have to be willing to step out in faith, and each time we do that, we're remembering God took care of me before, and every time we step out in faith, we get stronger. I guarantee you the first time that David fought a bear, he was like, that's a little scary. Then he whoops the bear, punches it in the face, then he punches a lion in the face, and he's like, I can do anything now. And God didn't get me eaten that time. He didn't let me get eaten this time. I'm not that scared anymore. And that's how we strengthen our faith, by taking these steps like David did, and that is how we grow to be a great leader. You see, we get through these daily struggles like David, and we grow. And David grew from those experiences and the giants he faced so he could lead for God. And the first thing that David learned through these trials was this. The first thing David learned through these trials was that we cannot lead if we cannot respect authority. You see, we cannot lead if we do not respect authority. And so he didn't kill Goliath and become the king the next day. When I was a little kid, I used to think that like David killed Goliath and the next day he's King David. Like, I mean, it makes sense, right? You whoop Goliath, you're the top dog, you're the toughest one. That's not how it worked. He spent years serving Saul, running away from Saul, trying to avoid spears thrown at his head while he's playing the harp. I always picture that in my head. David is playing the harp and spears are flying past his head. Does he just sit there? I mean, this is what life David had. And he was serving Saul. You see, Saul felt challenged by David. He'd have been anointed to be king by Samuel years ago. And Saul felt challenged by David. He tried to kill him many times. And so here's where we're at. At this point, Saul is chasing David into the desert, and David has all his men, and they're all together, and they're running from Saul's army. And we see this in 1 Samuel 24. It says, he came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave, all right? Saul's trying to kill David, okay? And so David and all his men are in the back of a cave, and of all the caves around the area, Saul decided to use that one for his bathroom. All right, that's basically what is going on here. It says this. The men said, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. So Saul is doing his business, and David creeps up unnoticed, cut off a corner of Saul's robe. So David goes up. He is so close to Saul. He is right there, and he cuts off a corner of his robe. I don't know if you guys have ever been like in a dark cave. Some of my friends and I, we'd go spelunking, and we were in some of these caves, and you put your hand right here, you literally can't see it. I would never have understood that until I did that. We slept in the cave one night, and we woke up, and we thought it was like 7 o'clock in the morning, and it was like 10 or 11. It was so dark that he didn't see David sneaking up on him. But David cuts off a corner of his robe, and after this it says this. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe, and he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. And with these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul, and Saul left the cave and went his way. Saul's a sitting duck. It is all over, and if you are in battle, isn't that the point of battle, to kill your enemy? And Saul is right there. We can finish this. And not only that, even if David is conscience-stricken, all his men are like, just let me at him. I'll take care of this. And if I'm David, I'm thinking, well, I can't do it, but I'll let him do it. I'm sick of being chased by Saul. I'm sick of having to live in caves. I'm sick of having to steal bread. I'm sick of all these things going on. I'm supposed to be the king. But you see, David knew you cannot lead if you cannot follow. You cannot lead if you cannot respect the authorities that God has put in place. It would be so hard for me not to just finish it right there, just to be done. You see, David respected authority. He knew real leadership is from respecting the authority that God has put into place. We can't expect to lead if we can't follow. And David's respect for Saul is contagious, and it sets an example for his leadership. He was upset that he even cut off a corner of the rope. And I'm thinking to myself, could have been worse. Could have stabbed him. Could have had your men kill him. And David's like, oh, I respect authority. I can't do that. To lead in life, we have to respect the authorities that God has set around us. I've got a story for you. So I was at Chandler, and the church I was at before, and I started our internship program. And we had interns coming in all the time. And I had my first intern, and he did a great job. He became my junior high pastor. I had another intern, did a great job. He became my college pastor. And then a little bit later, we had another intern. And we had lots of different interns coming in. Well, this one intern that I had, he was a little bit older, and he thought that he should be a pastor on staff, that he should have the job that these other guys had. And so he would undercut them, he would undermine them, he would say things about them, and he just generally caused problems. So he and I had to have a chat. Now, normally, I'm a very calm person in general, but he got me riled up. I explained, I said, you understand, these guys have earned their position. They have earned this. These are my guys. They're doing a great job. You don't talk about them. You don't do these types of things. And he continued to push back. I go, you don't understand. You have to respect authority. So because I'm a little mean sometimes, I told him, I said, from now on, you no longer have a name. Your name is intern. And I'm going to send that out to the rest of the staff. And they're not allowed to call you anything but intern from now on. I said, you know why? You can never, ever, ever lead until you respect authority, until you respect those that are above you. You can guess the reality of what happened. We finished out the internship, and he quit ministry, kind of went off the deep end and all those things. You know why? He had no idea what it meant to lead because he couldn't respect authority. Another example of that, my senior pastor out in Chandler, he's come and preached for us, Pastor Roger, and I love Pastor Roger. He has mentored me and done so much for me. But if there are two more different people in the world than Roger and I don't know them. Every single thing about us cannot be more opposite. If he thinks the sky is green, I think it's purple. There is literally almost nothing we agree on. And we would be in lead meetings, and just a couple of us, and we're talking, and it sounded like Roger and I were like an old married couple fighting all the time. No, it's this. No, it's this. It's this. It's no. We never, hardly ever. There was one meeting, one time. We both said the same thing as each other, and we agreed, and we looked at each other like, what just happened? You know what I'm talking about. There's people like that. You agree with them, and then you begin to second guess yourself now. Like, did I just agree with that person? But here's the thing. Roger's amazing, great guy, great heart. When we left that room, I did whatever Roger told me to do. Didn't matter what I felt. Didn't matter what I thought. And obviously none of it was wrong or sinful or anything like that. But it didn't matter if I agreed. I thought it should be this way and he thought it should be this way. I did it this way. You know why? Because he's the authority over my life. He was the authority in that position to tell me what to do, and I follow it. And I cannot lead if I don't know how to follow. And there's a couple of reasons I did that. The first is this, because it is the right thing to do. We follow authority and leadership. That's what God has called us to do. The second thing is this. I want those that I lead to do the same thing for me. I want them to argue with me in our meetings, and then when we walk out of that room, we're all on the same team. We're all on the same page. That's how that works. I want the same thing, but I can't have that if I don't give that. And a lot of us are like, I want to be in charge. Okay, can you follow the people that are in charge of you? Do you undercut them? Do you talk bad about them? Do you put them down? Do you cut their knees off? And if you can't do that, you can't lead. You cannot lead. And David knew that. David knew that. David was able to lead because he first knew how to follow. And so you want to be a leader for God? Learn how to follow well. Learn how to love those in authority over you. You see, David also learned this. David knew that to be a follower for God, he had to depend on the Lord. And there's no way you can get through all that without depending on the Lord, because you'll walk out of some meeting with somebody that's your authority, and you'll be like, oh, you will say, good Lord, I can't do it, man. This person's driving me nuts. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. Work. Maybe it's even at home or somewhere else, and you're like, I can't do this. You're like, I've got to depend on God to get through this. And David relied on God. Psalm 62 says this, Yes, my soul find rest in God. My hope comes from him. Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. My salvation and my honor depend on God. He is my mighty rock, my refuge. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. For us to lead, we have to trust in God because there will be things that we don't know what's going to happen. David assumed he was going to beat Goliath. He had no idea. He just went out there with a sling and some rocks. He had to trust that God was his refuge, that God was his strength, that God will be with him, and that I will not be shaken because I know who is in charge. See, that's what got David through all these difficulties in life. Some of these difficulties David started were by himself, and some were by others. All right, quick show of hands. How many people here have had difficulties in life because they've either started it or somebody else has started it? Anybody here? Okay, all right, okay, everybody, or you're a liar. Okay. Now, I'm going to be honest, maybe this isn't everybody, but how many of us in life, raise your hand if you've had difficulties because of your own stupidity? Yeah, do I need to put both hands up sometimes? We all have done that. We all have these different difficulties that have been caused by others and have been caused by ourselves. And what we do is we say, God is our refuge. God is our strength, and that's why I can power through. And by powering through those things, that's how we learn to lead. You see, David learned we all struggle and fall, but we get up and move forward for God again. I mean, you know the struggles David had. I mean, David takes Bathsheba, and then on top of that, he kills her husband. I mean, David had these issues. He had some struggles, and yet you've heard this phrase possibly before that David was called a man after God's own heart. How does that work? How is that? Well, think about this with me. There's a few options on what the term after his own heart could mean. The first is this. It could be a man patterned after his own heart. This could indicate that David's lifestyle was based on God's perfection, the perfection of God's heart. Apparently a psalmist from his youth, this could also be seen. So David, the perfection of God's heart, that's kind of how David is. Or there's another option. What about this? A man after God's own heart could be a man chasing after his own heart. Here's the picture of that. It's God is here, and I am going after God with my whole life and going. And it's like a kid following a parent, and the kid falls down, and either the parent helps him up or the kid gets up themselves, and they keep running towards him, and they fall down again, and they keep running towards God. And I'll be honest, I think that's how David is. I don't think David was perfect, obviously. And I don't think it's that. I think it's the fact that David was focused on God, and I talk about it all the time. God is more concerned about our direction than our perfection, and that's what David did. That's how David led. David knew that he was a fallen man. David knew that he was going to make mistakes, and yet he continued to lead and to follow no matter what was happening around him. You see, I think it's continually chasing after God, and that understanding of God is essential to how we lead. We're going to mess up, we get up, we continue on. That's how David led. So here's the culmination of David's leadership. It's this. The culmination of David's leadership is this. He was able to train the next generation of giant killers. He respected authority. He stayed focused on God even through his mistakes, and through that, he was able to train the next generation of giant killers. I told you Judges is my favorite book in the Bible. This might be my favorite section that is not in the book of Judges we're going to look at here in just a minute. You see, that's the key to leadership. Training the next generation to be giant killers. Whether that's in our home, whether that's at work, whether it's in our community, at church, and especially leading people and following God. Our goal of leadership is that others begin to follow what we do. That is what we want them to do. That is why relying on God is so important. And you may have thought Goliath was the only giant in the Bible, but there are several others. Actually, he has a whole bunch of relatives. This group, their family, they destroyed the local basketball leagues. All right? There's a whole team of them. Every night on the schedule, they go, we do not want to have to play the Rafa family again. We are not going to get a single rebound. There wasn't just one giant David had to deal with. He had to deal with more. So listen to 2 Samuel 21. Once again, there was a battle between the Philistines and Israel. David went down with his men to fight against the Philistines, and he became exhausted. Let me tell you what this looks like. David goes to fight, and he's a little bit older now. He's not quite as spry, and so he gets tired. And it's funny because I didn't plan this, but I lived that yesterday. So I went to camp, and we helped move some stuff up there, played a little basketball. I swam, and then last night was the alumni soccer game over at the school, and I said, hey, coach, can I play? He said, yeah. Then I realized I'm 25% older than anybody else out here. About 5 minutes in, I thought to myself, I'm exhausted. I'm dead. I'm not young like I used to be. I can't do that. We had kids here schooling me that are here in the church right now. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And I realized that's what David meant. I'm old. I can't keep fighting anymore. I can't do this. And so he gets tired in this battle. And then it says in verse 16, Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of Rapha, whose bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels and who was armed with a new sword, said he would kill David. David is tired. This giant is coming over. Now, a spearhead is 7.5 pounds is what this says, basically. 7.5 pounds. You throw a spear, all right? That is so heavy. It's like a small bowling ball. So this giant is stalking over to David. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to David's rescue. He struck the Philistine down and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, saying, never again will you go out with us to battle, so that the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished. David's men knew how to slay giants because David had shown them. He had taught them. He had shown them what it was like, and now they were giant slayers too. And that is what God has called us to do when we lead others. Train others to be giant slayers. In the course of time, there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob. At that time, Sibbecai the Hushathite killed Saph, one of the descendants of Rapha, the giants. In another battle with Philistines at Gob, Elhanan, son of Jair, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath the Gittite, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod. So do you see what's happening here? David has trained people to be giant slayers, to get through issues, to do struggles, to lead. David passed it on to them, and that's what God has called us to do, to lead like David. And that means we pass on God's word, we pass on God's love, we lead others to him, and we are intentional about that. I mean, this giant right here that this guy killed, a weaver's rod weighs 16 pounds. 16 pounds, all right? A spear is meant to be thrown. A shot put in the Olympics is 20 pounds. Okay, so the spear is going to have a tip. It's going to have all this other stuff as well. So basically, he is chucking a spear like they would a shot put. And when you see in the shot put, they're like spinning around. These big old strong dudes, and they just throw it and they just kind of lob it as far as they can go. This guy's chucking a spear like that, like it's nothing. These are some serious problems, serious giants. And my favorite one is this, because I like weird things. In still another battle, which took place at Gath, there was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He was also descended from Rapha. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of Shimei, David's brother, killed him. This cat is so big, he needs extra digits. And every time I think of 6 fingers, I think of Princess Bride, the 6-fingered man. This guy is so big, he grew extra digits. This is a big, bad dude. And again, David had invested, he led, he showed these guys, this is how you defeat giants. Verse 22. These 4 were descendants of Rapha and Gath, and they all fell at the hands of David and his mighty men. You want to know if you're a leader? You want to know if you're a leader? Do your followers, the people that you're investing in, the people that you care about, the people that you are giving your life, are they able to work through the same situations that you can? Can they deal with life the same way you can? Have you invested in them enough? Can they make the same decisions? Can you pass that along? And do they follow God like you follow God? That's what it means to be a leader. We see that with David. David is invested in these guys for so much and so much time. They are giant killers too. They can slay problems. They can slay whatever comes up around them. You see, he led by example. He even led through difficulties. He led in battle. He led in tough times. He led in being a man after God's own heart by pursuing God. And we do the same. We take what God has showed us and we pass it along. We can be like David. We can lead like him. You see, reproducing God followers is what we do if we want to grow to be like David. So here's the question I have for you today. Who are you mentoring? Who are you leading like David led his men? And if you don't know, you need to think about it. You need to think about that. Because if we don't know off the top of our head, then we are not doing it specifically. Now, I don't know if David had classes. Like, I don't know if, like, they built, like, a 10-foot, like, board thing, and they threw spears at their head so you guys, just in case we run into another giant, you guys need to be ready. I don't know if that's how that worked. I don't know if he's specific about that, but he led them well enough that they were able to do it. So who are you leading well enough so that they can be the next level of giant slayers, so that when we're tired, they take on the faith? They're the ones that can deal with struggles, and they are passing that along then to somebody else. Who is that? I hate to confess, I'm not very specific sometimes about that. I mean, occasionally I think about it, and I've thought about it more lately. Who am I investing in? What does that look like? Way too often it's accidental. Way too often it's accidental. Even with my own boys. Instead of being specific to take opportunities, sometimes it's just accidental. And then I realize it's my job to make them giant slayers. It is my job to get them prepared to be the leaders of this next generation. It is my job to make sure that their heart is following God and that they are men after God's own heart. So who will you lead to God, and who will you teach to be a giant slayer? How are we leading? Are we leading by what we show people? 1 Corinthians 11:1 says this. We're almost done. 1 Corinthians 11:1, Paul writes this: follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Paul does not say that conceitedly. Paul does not say, you know what, Jesus didn't sin and I'm right next, I'm second place. That's not what Paul is saying. He's saying, like David, pursue God. And when you stumble and fall, that's a great opportunity to teach. And you get back up and you go, and that's a great opportunity to teach. He knows he wasn't perfect. He knew he was going to have struggles. There's going to be ups and downs. But through that relationship, we lead other people. We teach them through that. We strive to point to God through our life. You see, that will mentor those who you build relationships with to see that we're all messy, we all need grace, but we're focused and moving towards God. You see, that was why David said God is his salvation. He is his hope. He is his fortress and strength. So who will you lead to be ready to battle for God? Who will you build up to be mighty men that are giant slayers around you? Because that's what God's mission is. It all goes back to what Jesus said. He said, go and make disciples. It's kind of funny that David was making disciples before they talked about making disciples. And that's what David did. You want to lead like David? Go make disciples. Go make disciples. Go make giant slayers. But you see, leading like David starts with following. And that means before we can lead, we have to follow well, like I said. And we have to follow Jesus as our Savior and boss and Lord. We can't lead anywhere we haven't been. So we start with giving Jesus our lives. We call that getting on base with God. The B is to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. A is to admit that I'm a sinner and I need a Savior. Surrender. Okay. And so for us to surrender and say, God, you're in charge of every area of my life. And E is to express that in Christian baptism. We get on base with God and we just say, God, you're in charge of my life. And we follow you. And once we begin to follow him, then we can lead others with us. But if you've already made that decision, then here's our mission for today. And you probably figured out, not just today, but for the rest of our life, who are you leading? Who are you mentoring to be a giant slayer? Who are you leading in the faith to Jesus and then beyond to show them what it looks like to deal with problems and issues in life and struggles and the ups and downs? Who are you leading? Who are you going to make a giant slayer? So I've coached sports for a long time. I played sports for a long time. And I love playing sports. And I'll be honest, I liked, when I played sports, I was okay. And I liked, doing certain things, getting goals and stuff like that. But I'll be honest, there is nothing better than whenever the kids you are coaching do what you've been teaching and training them to do. I had some little kids playing one day, and It was a pug field. It was a small field with little kids. And kids, when you watch kids soccer, they just clump and they run around. That's what they do a lot of times. My teams, we work on passing and spreading, and we do all these different things. And so this is about U5. And so one of my kids dribbles down the sideline, and this is how it's supposed to be, crosses the ball to the middle at U5, and my other guy in the middle just hits it in. I think I laid down on the ground with a heart attack. As I walked past the parents, I said, I can die a happy man. I can't believe this just happened. And it's funny, when I think about creating giant slayers, and I keep thinking about mentoring, and I think about teaching, man, there is nothing better than seeing the person that you're mentoring, that you're leading, to be a giant slayer themselves. That is the best, when they become a giant slayer. So here's my mission. Find somebody to be intentional with. Find somebody to teach to be a giant slayer. You go yourself and bring them with you. Take them to God. Show them about God. Teach them about God. And when you do that, you can lead like Jesus. You can lead like David.